instilled with today, meaning that in order to avoid guilt from their own consciences, many of them would not want to do such things as have an abortion, even if given the choice. And those who would choose to do these things if given the choice, or who personally didn't believe they were immoral, generally wouldn't for fear of the shame culture. They feared negative reactions from the public and their reputations being tarnished should they cause a scandal. Nowadays, though, there really isn't much that one can do to scandalize. One can easily have or even celebrate having an abortion, and should anyone argue that it's murder, then this person is declared as being opposed to women's rights. One can be dangerously obese and will be celebrated as beautiful and inspiring, and should anyone point out that morbid obesity is detrimental towards one's health and puts them at a higher risk for numerous diseases, this person will be declared a hater. One can also allow their children as young as 4 years old to switch genders and will be lauded by the media and various LGBTQ organizations, and should anyone point out that allowing a child to transition at such a young age is child abuse, or that no child has the suitable cognitive development to make such a monumental decision, they're declared transphobic. While I can't determine the strength of the guilt culture in our current society, as I can't read people's minds, the shame culture in our current society has definitely been conquered by the immoral culture. And while I don't necessarily think it's very kind to shame people, in fact it can be rather cruel, it most definitely is very effective. The majority of people today are sheep, and that's just the truth. They care about what others think about them to the extent that they will allow the actions and beliefs of the majority to dictate their own actions and beliefs. So, if given a choice to commit an action that the majority of society deemed immoral, they probably wouldn't do it, particularly if they would be shamed for doing so, or at the very least, they'd do it in secret. If our current society suddenly decided to readopt the shame and guilt cultures in favor of the immoral one, our society would change, and it would do so very quickly. The question is this something that the majority of Americans would even want? Furthermore, before we could even consider readopting these cultures, we would need to agree upon a set of morals. Because right now, America is extremely divided in this regard. Various groups have completely different conceptions of morality. For example, some would argue that the most radical conservatives' morals are too strict, and some would argue that the most radical liberals, that there is no line, no matter how degenerate, that they won't cross. At this rate, bestiality and pedophilia won't only one day be normalized, they will be celebrated. This is, unfortunately, the inevitable outcome of an amoral culture. And this is why it could be argued that we as a society would greatly benefit from a defined set of morals, as well as distinct lines drawn that we are discouraged from crossing. It's at this point that the shame culture would kick in, and it would do much to ensure that the aforementioned boundaries and set of morals are respected.
So one of the most popular talking points about the progressive left, SJW culture, is that it's a name and shame culture, and that it's a culture about making people feel guilt. Guilt for being white, guilt for being rich, guilt for being straight, ad infinitum. The only existing political movement that is really pulling for shame is the alt-right, and I'll explain how I came to that conclusion. One of the major pillars of the alt-right narrative, political narrative, is degeneracy. That's why I thought it was really fascinating when Milo Yiannopoulos was alt-right adjacent. He was supposedly sympathetic to the movement and their goals, because as the more socially libertarian elements have been filtered out of the alt-right, the standard issue anti-abortion white Christian element, represented most of all by Tara McCarthy, Brittany Pettibone, and Lauren Southern, the purity culturalist. Most importantly, by the suggestively titled, in the suggestively titled Virtue of the West podcast. Now, some people consider Virtue of the West to be more moderate than Red Ice TV, which is like the super hardcore Jewish conspiracy, blacks are subhuman animals, white nationalist channel. I always come back to like this, it's a distinction without a difference. So Brittany Pettibone and Tara McCarthy are less aggressive than Red Ice. They are more, particularly Brittany Pettibone is a little bit more PC about how they present their pro-white, pro-West, pro-purity agenda. Even though there is some crossover with Lana Lochtef's narratives, Lana Lochtef of Red Ice TV is more in tune with paganist, occult, white culture, and sort of a Norse Odinist form of tribalism. I think Pettibone and McCarthy, in virtue of the West, are a sort of Victorian Christian morality program that wants to restore shame. That's how we got to that brings me to my point. In her video, Brittany Pettibone talks about the importance of restoring shame, which is so fucking regressive. In the West, the sort of the Puritan culture has died down, particularly in the internet age, with everyone sort of having access to diverse opinions and a more liberalized worldview. And even international corporations have become less socially prudish because there's more money in being open-minded. Obviously, if you appeal and market to the maximum number of customers rather than like a group of white Christian perpetually offended haters, you're going to make money. So Tara McCarthy. In this video, Brittany Pettibone talks about, and she even points out that in not so many words, but basically that cultures of shame are cruel. I'm going to say it. When someone talks about restoring shame to a society, and she even denounces cultures of guilt and claims that urban cultures are amoral. I'm going to debunk that too. Only to someone who thinks that anything outside of missionary style, procreative, heterosexual sex is immoral would only that kind of person would look at urban culture being accepting of degeneracy as amorality, meaning that somehow people are just standing by while all this bad shit goes down, which is not. I mean, again, it's just kind of like in a city you mind your own business. For better or worse, you mind your own business and you don't walk around. It's not manageable like a little town where you can go around shaming people without getting some major blowback. But culture of shame and cruelty. I am fascinated by the regression proposed by the members of the alt-right that are obsessed with cultural purity, with racial purity, with sexual purity. To see Brittany Pettibone and Lauren Southern marketing trad life, the merits of trad wifeism, of keeping your light under a bushel until you make it to marriage with the right white man. I mean, even someone like Blair White has put out tweets about being biased racially. I remember there was a tweet that she put out saying, "If he's not Aryan, we're not marrying." And what's really fascinating to me about people like Blair White or Michelle Caitlin, look up Michelle Caitlin on Twitter, who are trad life adjacent, but are by those same standards degenerates. And the same thing with Milo Yiannopoulos is also another kind of like advocate of traditional values who also doesn't practice what he preaches. The first words out of his mouth are promiscuous interracial sex, and the last words out of his mouth is that Western traditional values are being undermined by Muslim cultural imperialism. So all those people are, if you look at those people, if you do a Venn diagram, you'll see that they're all kind of weirdly correlated to each other. They don't seem to match up in the same movement. And slowly, the center of that movement has started to exclude people like Blair White, who used to be in at least the orbit of that movement of the alt-right. She's out. Yiannopoulos is out. White virgins are in. Now, I don't think any of these people advocating for virginity are actual virgins, except for, if you go to Red Ice TV, there's this girl called the Blonde Buttermaker. She looks like she's been preserved. So what is my concern with Brittany Pettibone proposing a society of shame, a culture of shame? All this bitching about Sharia law and these fundamentalist forms of Sharia law that are entirely based on shame, entirely based on the community enforcing moral codes. And then for those same people who criticize that to then turn around and basically propose white Christian Sharia is fascinating to me. This idea of we need to get back to what her whole premise is. We need to get back to slut shaming. We need to get back to closeting homosexual. We need to get back to marginalizing Jewish people. We need to get back to shaming those who don't conform, which is a form of cultural and emotional violence. Is a proposition that is very strange from someone who has a lot of people who pop on her podcast and in her orbit who are organizing all these freedom rallies and free speech rallies. I don't understand. Which one is it? You can have shame or you can have liberty. You'll never have both.